The story sent today to the Destroyer of Souls is from a girl named Exiu. She recounted all the events that she and her family have gone through from then until now. The story begins with Exius' mother. She said that her mother was a light-hearted woman. Back in the day, when she was pregnant with Exiu, she worked in a company and often had to do overtime late at night. At that time, everyone took turns working the night shift and resting, but they were not allowed to sleep outside. They had to work through the night. If they wanted to rest, they usually had to sneak into the bathroom to take a quick nap. Sia's mother said that each time she went in there to sleep, she would see a white shadow gliding back and forth. In fact, she could even hear footsteps walking around her. From that moment on, she knew that she was a person with a light spirit. Therefore, during the time that followed, there was another occasion when she, for the sake of making a living, went fruit trading with a friend. This story took place a long time ago in Dongnai. As for the specific location, she couldn't remember clearly, but she knew that area had a military barracks, like the usual barracks, surrounded by a road. On both sides of the road were graves, a cemetery stretching out chillingly. It was already late afternoon, and the stillness of the scene was frightening. While walking normally, she suddenly saw from a distance on her right something white. She squinted to see more clearly and discovered that there was a woman sitting on a tombstone. That woman was staring intently at her and her friend, who were walking together. At that moment, she knew that she had encountered something she should not have seen. Terrified, but she forced herself to chant silently, reminding herself not to panic. If she panicked, they would know she saw them, and they might follow her to cause trouble. Therefore, she ignored that eerie gaze and tried to stay calm, continuing to walk. She could still see the white figure, but her feet were determined to keep moving forward. As she got closer, she could see that the woman was holding a comb in her hands. She was sitting there, combing her long hair over and over again, obsessively. Both of them hurriedly walked past that spot, and when they finally got through, she sighed in relief. When she glanced at her friend walking beside her, she saw that the friend's face was just as pale as hers. Suddenly, her friend turned to her and asked, "Did you see that too?" They both fell silent, but understood that they had encountered the same horrifying scene. It wasn't just her alone. And after that incident for a while, this girl suddenly gained the ability to read tarot cards. She read cards for family members and friends, and she has a book that details astrology and fortune-telling in an ancient style. Additionally, she has another talent from her maternal side. On her paternal side, her great-grandfather was once a well-known master, and he had 2 disciples to whom he passed on his craft. Both of these disciples are still alive, one of whom specializes in choosing auspicious dates for weddings, openings, and ceremonies. Sia's family often relies on this man. The second disciple also tells fortunes, but he possesses additional skills in charms and talismans. Sia's father recounted that her great-grandfather was a very famous figure in the area. He was even able to ascertain the day and time of his own death and advised his descendants in advance to prepare for his funeral. Both Exius' grandfather and father have some knowledge of the rituals related to feng shui and offerings, as they were passed down by the great-grandfather. But over the generations, this knowledge has gradually diminished. Sia's family has always been involved in trade and business, so they place great importance on rituals and offerings. Every month, on the 2 and 16th of the lunar calendar, they regularly perform offerings to the wandering spirits, also known as offerings for the souls of the deceased. At first, everything went normally, until one day, Exiu recounted that it was a very heavy storm that day, Her father still performed the offerings as usual, but he was worried that if he placed the offerings outside, the rain would soak the cakes and fruits, and all the offerings would be ruined. Moreover, the children in the neighborhood had been taking fewer offerings lately, so he was concerned that doing it this way might not be good. Thus, he decided to still perform the offering, but place the items in the yard instead of taking them out to the street. His yard had a canopy that could provide shelter from the rain. He burned incense, said his prayers, and then went to sleep. That night, while he was sleeping, he had a very vivid dream. In the dream, he saw many shadowy figures crowded outside his house, in front of the gate. Among them, there was a very small child, but he couldn't remember whether it was a boy or a girl. The child spoke to him. "Uncle, if you are going to make offerings, please do it outdoors, not in the yard. We cannot come in to receive the blessings because there are offerings being made inside the house." That dream left him deep in thought. Hearing that statement, the uncle immediately jolted awake, knowing for sure this was not an ordinary dream. The spirits were here to remind him. From that point onward, regardless of how heavy the storms raged, he continued to make offerings outside on the street so that those souls could partake. The uncle himself had many spiritual stories, but what Z remembered most was an event during the year of the pandemic. Friends, everything came so quickly. Basic necessities were no longer sufficient for eating, let alone the matter of making offerings. His family, as previously mentioned by N-Guy N, had been in business and offerings were essential. But now, with the pandemic, they had no choice. Incense could not be bought. Fruits were unavailable. The altar in their home sat cold and empty. His family does not have an ancestral altar, even though his father is the eldest son. The altar for the 9 spirits and 7 ancestors of his family will be placed at his uncle Ut's house, which is also the family's communal worship site. Uncle Ut is responsible for taking care of their grandmother and performing rituals for their ancestors up until now. Inside the house, Xiu will have an altar for his grandmother, who is regarded as a saint that blesses his father and mother. In addition, there are 2 altars for the land genie. One is placed inside the house, and one is at her mother's business venue. The family also has an altar for the earth god, the wealth god, and 2 heavenly altars. The heavenly altar is an outdoor altar often seen in the Mekong Delta, where any house with a yard typically has such altars. Her house has 2 heavenly altars, one in the front yard and one in the backyard. During the peak of the COVID outbreak in Dong Nai, his house was in the red zone, which meant they couldn't go anywhere and couldn't burn incense. During that time, the number of deaths from COVID increased rapidly. The number of people who died from the pandemic surrounding her house was so high that it could be described as a separation. He still remembers one night, while lying down to sleep, he heard the sound of rain falling. Then around his were the cries, moans, and laments of those who had died unexpectedly. At first, he thought he was mistaken, but after asking the neighbors, he realized that it was not just her. Many others also heard those sounds of lamentation. Only when everyone was able to burn incense again on the altars did this situation gradually lessen. At that time, it was very gloomy at home, and they didn't know what to do. His parents and uncles and aunts usually ran food businesses, so when the local militia came to supply food, his uncles and aunts often cooked various dishes, and in the evening, they would exercise and sing karaoke together at home. The karaoke routine was quite interesting. Usually, the couple would sing together, then his uncle would go into the front room to rest. A little while later, When his aunt finished singing, his uncle would come back outside to turn off all the equipment and lights, and then both would return to the bedroom. The living room and the bedroom in his house are adjacent to each other. At first, everything was normal, nothing at all. Until that time, he was lying in the room when suddenly he heard a woman scream from outside. He ran out to check, and when he asked, she didn't say anything at all, but her face was pale as death. From that day on, things started to get strange. About 2 or 3 days later, she screamed so loudly that even Exiu upstairs could hear it. The two of them ran downstairs to ask if something was wrong. At that point, she began to recount that just earlier, she was sitting and singing karaoke. Their house had a pathway leading down the side, passing by the bedroom, and had stairs leading up to the second floor. She said that she clearly saw a white shadow moving from downstairs, going up the stairs and disappearing upstairs. She told them that she saw that shadow moving very quickly, like a flash of lightning, but she was absolutely certain that she didn't missee it. At the time when the couple's family encountered strange occurrences, it was during the 7th month of the lunar calendar. At that time, we were also in the midst of a pandemic, so no one could organize any ritual offerings. When everyone looked at each other, it seemed as if they all understood the reason behind the strange events. One night, numerous bizarre phenomena occurred in the house. The family had installed a security camera, one that had an audio alert feature. For instance, if anyone or any animal, even just a lizard, passed in front of the lens, the system would sound an alarm. At night, this function was activated, and the alert sound would be directly connected to both the phone of the father and the brother-in-law of the family, the husband of the older sister. Their house was only about 200-300 meters away from the family's house. One late night, while the whole family was in a deep sleep, suddenly the alert sound rang out on the father's phone, startling him awake. Thinking there was a thief, he immediately opened his phone to check the camera, but saw nothing unusual. There was no one or anything in sight. However, at the same time, his brother-in-law also received a similar alert. When he opened the camera to check, he saw a distinct white figure standing right in the living room. At that moment, suspecting that something was wrong at home, Exiu immediately called his father to report. Sia's father also went to check right away, looking all around but found nothing. He turned on the light to inspect very carefully, even getting close to the camera to see if there was anything stuck on the screen or the reader of the camera, but still found nothing unusual. Therefore, he turned off the light and went back to bed. However, just about 15-20 minutes later, the alarm on his phone went off again. When Zia's father checked, he still didn't see anything strange. However, on the other side of the house, Zia's brother-in-law witnessed the exact same scene as before. A white shadow standing in front of the camera right in the living room. At that time, Ziu and her family were very worried. Zia's brother-in-law had called to report to his father-in-law. He then went outside to check again. At this point, he was very annoyed, trying to keep his eyes wide open despite feeling sleepy. He turned on all the lights to observe, and discovered near the camera's position a couplet that resembled the poetic couplet that the family had asked for blessings from the temple. The content of this couplet spoke about the family's life over the past year. He began to feel suspicious, quickly gathered the couplet, silently opened the shop door, and burned it completely. After that, he returned to the bedroom, and indeed the camera no longer sent alerts. The next morning, he dared to tell this story to his mother and everyone in the family. Sia's older brother and brother-in-law also brought back the video footage from the night before, which included the recording from the camera. Everyone saw a white shadow standing in front of the camera. At this moment, when everyone asked again, Zeus's father explained that he had forbidden everyone in the house from taking items from the temple, especially from those temples that housed urns. He said that the spirits in the temple could cling to objects like couplets, peace, amulets, or similar items to follow people who took them home. Therefore, he doesn't want anyone to take those things home anymore. If someone still wants to ask for items like tattoos or couplets, after receiving them, they should read the content and then take them to the place where they burn paper money and offerings in the temple to burn everything immediately, so as to avoid any unwanted incidents like what happened last night. After the stories that Exius's parents experienced, it's now time for the events that Exiu himself encountered. The first story begins when Ziu was in the 12th grade. As you know, students have just gone through a stressful final exam period, studying day and night without rest. Ziu stated that he studied a lot in the evening, and the place he studied was about 10 kilometers from home. On the way, he had to pass through a stretch of road that often witnessed accidents, where there is a very sacred dual shrine established by the locals. At night, around 8-9 p.m., there are very few people passing through this area. This shrine is not only a sacred place, but also a gathering point for many people to perform rituals, seek lottery numbers, especially those who gamble on soccer matches. Every night, many people gather here in large numbers. Everything continued like this until one day. In this instance, after a whole day at school and then studying again in various classes at night, the student felt extremely tired around 8 p.m. while sitting in a math review class. Suddenly, sleepiness hit, making it impossible for his to resist. Therefore, he decided to leave early. However, it was strange that from the time he left class until he got home, his fatigue completely vanished. He no longer felt sleepy, dizzy, or lethargic. On the contrary, he felt very energetic. He sat down at his desk to study, and then lay in bed playing on her iPad until nearly midnight, when sleepiness finally set in again. At that moment, the drowsiness came on just as suddenly as it had in class earlier. He barely had time to stand up, turn off the iPad, shut off the lights, and then he lay down and fell into a deep sleep immediately. But suddenly, out of nowhere, Siu jolted awake upon hearing someone calling his name in the night. Siu, Exiu, Oxiu, Exio. The voice came from the window above the bed where he lay. He felt it was very close, sending chills down his spine and causing goosebumps to rise on his skin. He laid there defenseless, unable to control his limbs. Although he opened his eyes, he still saw himself lying in the room, surrounded only by darkness, unable to make out anything clearly. Perhaps it was because his eyes had not yet adjusted to the nightlight. Everything appeared vague and indistinct. Lying like this, he didn't dare to glance up at the window above for fear of encountering something undesirable. So he kept his eyes shut, trying to endure. He continued to hear someone calling his name, and this voice belonged to a middle-aged woman, but it was definitely not his mother's voice. How could a son possibly mistake his mother's voice? In the family, as he had mentioned, they placed great importance and caution on spiritual matters. His family had warned him that in the evening, if he heard someone calling his name, he must not respond. At home, they were also very careful about calling the names of children because there was an incident long ago when his elder sister was still small. Their mother called her name in the empty field. This allowed a ghost to know the child's name, leading to it following and disturbing them. His mother had to perform a large ritual for his sister to be safe and recover from illness. Since then, his family had been very superstitious about this, absolutely avoiding calling each other's names in public, refraining from laughing or singing in quiet places. Therefore, upon hearing that voice, knowing for sure it was not his mother, he tried to keep his mind clear. He resolutely did not reply, did not look up, and simply lay still, enduring it all. And a while later, his body began to feel light. He tried with all his might to flail his arms around, searching for the iPad to turn on the light. When he looked at the clock, he saw it was exactly midnight. This meant he had only been asleep for about 10 to 15 minutes. However, the feeling upon waking made him think he had slept very deeply, probably for 3 to 4 hours, rather than realizing it was just a short time. All night, despite feeling very uncomfortable, he kept the light on and tried to lay back down to sleep. The next morning, when he met his mother, she asked, "Did you fall asleep yesterday or something? Why is the light on?" She said that, when walking past his room, she noticed a beam of light under the door. He didn't want to share this story, so he just replied vaguely, "Yes, I forgot to turn it off." But strangely, this situation repeated itself consistently for 3 to 4 days. This caused his parents to start suspecting and asking him repeatedly, but he still decided to keep it to himself and not discuss what had happened. Until Friday and Saturday, he had returned to normal and no longer experienced any strange phenomena. Therefore, he turned off the lights and went to sleep. Just as predicted, he encountered no issues and did not hear anyone calling his name. He managed to sleep for 2-3 days in conditions with the lights off like that. But then, he had another dream, counting from the first time he felt strange running from school at 8 p.m. after math class. By this point, it had been the 10th day. In the dream, he saw himself passing by his grandmother's house. His grandmother's house was also nearby, although he rarely visited due to some family issues. But for some reason, he dreamed about it. He saw his grandmother along with another person. This person appeared to be someone who often went to the temple with his grandmother. The two of them invited him. "Ziyu, how about we go to the double temple now?" The three of them made their way to the double temple. His friends waited outside while his grandmother and her friend went inside. Suddenly, he encountered a woman. She was sitting in front of the temple, appearing out of nowhere, looking straight at him and asking, "Do you know me?" He was taken aback and asked back, "Who are you?" The woman smiled and asked again, "Do you know me?" At that moment, in his dream, Siyu asked again, "Are you the one who called my name the other night?" She laughed maniacally. Her chilling laughter echoed continuously. Then she replied, "That's right. It's me. I called your name." Siyu, frightened, asked again, "I haven't done anything to you. I have never met or disturbed you. Why are you bothering me like this?" She laughed and answered, "It's because I see you often passing by the place where I died at night, so I followed you. I will catch you." After listening, he was really scared. He called out, "But I haven't done anything to you. Please forgive me." Then that lady suddenly said, "I had a heart attack. I fell down on the street and I died. You have to be like me for me to feel happy." Oh my God, when he heard that, my friends didn't have time to react, and he didn't have time to think. Even though deep in his dream, he clearly knew he was dreaming, she appeared out of nowhere. Her whole face was pressed close to mine. She said, "This isn't over. I'll wait until the day you go like I did." Then she grinned, and inside her mouth was nothing but blood. The blood surged out, pouring out like a waterfall. She had no teeth left. It's hard to describe. He felt truly terrified. He jolted awake from that nightmare, drenched in sweat. After that horrific nightmare, Every time he returned from school and passed by the Domiu road, he felt like many strange things were happening. Riding my bike as usual, suddenly, in front of me, he felt as if he was in a trance, stumbling until he jolted back to reality and clearly saw the surroundings. Each time he felt like this and ended up falling to the ground. Sometimes, when passing by the area in front of the Domiu or nearby, he saw about 5 or 6 tall shadows walking ahead of me, but he couldn't see their shapes clearly. He only saw that they were tall. Every time he got closer, those shadows vanished. Sometimes they walk along the sidewalk, and other times they're pulling each other across to the other side. In general, each time I get close, these shadows all disappear. According to him, this area is filled with eerie things, like a spiritual path. There are days when I come home from school, also early, around 5 or 6 p.m., when the sky is just barely dimming a little bit, my friends. Below the Double Temple, if anyone is from Dongnai, you probably know this place, right? Let me describe it like this. The Double Temple is located at the top, next to a winding S-shaped road that runs straight down below. At the bottom of this temple, there is a goat hot pot restaurant, and nearby, there is an abandoned house that has been derelict for a long time. No one lives there, and it's in a terrible state of disrepair. One evening, when Xiu was returning home from school and passed by this abandoned house, he saw something strange with his own eyes. According to what people often call it, it was a spirit, or more accurately, a demon. Its lower body resembled that of a human, and she saw it very clearly because the distance at that time was not too far. In fact, as he ran past, Xiu even turned his head to look back and still saw the dog-headed demon standing in the same spot. The strange thing was that only Xiu saw it. His friends and everyone around did not see anything at all. Xiu also shared that if you travel from Saigon to Vungtao via the Catlay ferry, you'll pass through this area and the nearby rubber plantation. This place has long been filled with rumors about ghosts and spirits, as he has lived close to the rubber plantation since childhood, right next to his maternal grandparents' house. He said that, according to him, there is a big demon in front of his grandmother's house and a small demon behind it, which has existed for a very long time. And all the people who work and live in this area have encountered strange occurrences related to this. Even his aunt, who lives at his grandmother's house, was hidden away and taken by a ghost with long breasts. It resembled a kind of monster that rendered people's mouths paralyzed, unable to speak, filled only with clay and muddy silt. After that, the ghost hid his aunt in a banana bush near the water well. At first, when his grandmother and a few aunts went to work, they left his aunt near the water well, telling her to stay here and play. However, when everyone finished their tasks and came out to look for her, they didn't find his aunt anywhere. They searched everywhere, even turning the rubber tree area upside down, but still couldn't find her. It was not until his grandmother prayed and asked for help from the unseen spirits that they suddenly heard the sound of his aunt crying from within the banana bush. And after that story, approximately 2 months later, something new happened. Sia's house is located in Dongnai, opposite a small hill. Therefore, when it rains, soil and sand from the hill flow down the road with the water. Sia's father, concerned that the locals might slip and fall while passing by, voluntarily cleans up without anyone pressing him to do so. He often piles the sand into a mound right in front of the house, at the base of a fig tree, keeping it neat and tidy, ensuring that sand does not spill onto the road so that everyone can pass safely. Despite his carefulness, An unfortunate incident had once occurred when Exiu was about 6 or 7 years old. One late night, two men who were construction workers were returning home after drinking. They rode their motorbike past the bend in front of Exiu's house. Since they couldn't control their speed and the road was slippery after the rain, their motorcycles skidded at the curve and crashed directly into the pile of sand that Ishu's father had cleared after the rain. This area has a bend that is obscured, but it is not overly dangerous if one drives slowly. However, because the two men had been drinking beer and were speeding, a tragic accident occurred. As a result, one person died on the spot, while the other passed away on the way to the hospital. At that time, Exis's family lived right in front of the fig tree, so when they rushed out to see, everyone also knew what had happened. However, the whole family agreed to keep it from Exius' mother. The reason was that at that moment, the family was running a breakfast shop, and as you might know, running a breakfast business requires waking up very early, sometimes having to stay up from 2-3 a.m. or even 3-4 a.m. to prepare the items, cook, simmer the bones, and many other tasks. If Exius' mother found out, she would definitely be scared and their lives would be disrupted. Therefore, everyone agreed to keep this matter a secret. However, after the two construction workers died, that curve seemed to have something unusual about it. It was as if there was a mold, as people in the South often say. Anyone passing by that spot who had an accident would do so at a single point precisely where the two construction workers had lost their lives long ago. Fortunately, until now, those who had accidents there only sustained injuries or minor abrasions, and there had not been any cases of loss of life. The story continued like this until the time when Zia's sister turned 18. At that point, the family had 2 dogs. In the evening, they often let the 2 dogs outside to relieve themselves. After they finished, she would clean up and call them back inside. As she closed the door and called the 2 dogs in, Zia's sister casually said something in a playful way that we often use to call dogs and cats as if they were people. She said, "Hey, you two. Come inside. Come on in, you 2 rascals." She meant to call the 2 dogs. But sitting next to his sister as he heard her say that, Exiu saw the 2 dogs rush into the house while she pulled down the rolling door. Even she wondered to herself, why did I just say that? There are 2 men outside too. I must be crazy. That night, he didn't know if his sister had encountered any trouble, as he hadn't heard her say anything about it. When Exiu was 18 years old, specifically about 2 months after the event that Nguyen just mentioned, his family was still running a food stall in the evenings. After cleaning up and washing the dishes, he went outside to pull down the rolling door. Suddenly, he blurted out the exact phrase that his sister had once said, "Get inside. You two?" Even though there were no dogs or cats in the house anymore, he exclaimed that phrase without understanding why. As soon as he realized this, he was taken aback, but he brushed it off because he was too tired after a long day of washing and tidying up. That night, around 2-3 a.m. while he was sleeping, he suddenly sat up, turned on the light, and sat there vacantly on the bed. The strange thing was that he was fully aware of what he was doing, yet he couldn't control his body, as if he was losing control. In his mind, he very much wanted to sleep again, but his limbs felt like they weren't his, not obeying his commands at all. And then, his ears caught the sound of 2 men quietly talking, engaged in lively discussion. He knew they were speaking Vietnamese, but he couldn't quite make out the specific content. Even the laughter and the cheerful chatter about something made it sound very lively. When the chatter ceased, he automatically stood up to turn off the light and then climbed back into bed to continue sleeping. However, just about 5–10 minutes after lying down, his limbs went stiff again, and once more he heard the sound of the two men talking softly beside him. He lay still, enduring it, and the voices continued until around 3:30 a.m. At that time, X's mother woke up to prepare breakfast, and when she turned on the hallway light, the brightness spilled through the crack of his bedroom door, freeing him from the state of being paralyzed by the shadow. What was strange was that this experience didn't just occur one day, it repeated many days afterward. Then it began with Siu, suffering from insomnia. There was one day he couldn't sleep, friends staying awake for nearly 24 hours. By morning, around 4-something, he managed to doze off for a few extremely brief moments. During that time, he dreamt a dream. In the dream, he saw a very tall man, about over 2 meters. The man's voice was deep and rumbling, sounding quite majestic. Although he couldn't see the face clearly, the man's stance and walk were imposing, powerful, and exuded a sense of dignity. The man was dressed entirely in black, from head to toe. Then he spoke to Xiu. "I am in your home, protecting your family. Do not be afraid or worried. If something happens, I will protect you." After that, the man handed him a box and said, "This is the box I give you. It will be helpful to you." He heard the clock chime around 6 in the morning. He opened his eyes and clearly saw a figure walking in from outside, then disappearing into the wardrobe. Since that time, he had gradually heard the voices of 2 men conversing less and less. As he had mentioned at the previous event, he often dreamt of an elderly woman who had died of heart disease on the street. She was always trying to catch him. However, since then, those dreams of her had also become less frequent. During the Buddha's birthday festival that year, his grandmother took him to the temple. He told her about the occurrences, and she advised him to be patient while she went to the temple to request a string of prayer beads for him. Afterward, his grandmother read the Earth Treasury Sutra for 3 days and 3 nights before handing the beads to him to wear. From the moment he wore the beads, he felt very at ease, enjoyed deep sleep, and no longer experienced sleep paralysis or nightmares. However, that feeling of peace did not last long. The beads on his wrist only lasted about 1 to 2 months at most. Sometimes, he could only wear them for 4 to 5 days before they broke, as if someone had secretly snatched the beads from him while he was sleeping. According to what Ziyu recounted, he had to wear a dozen necklaces, but they all broke. The last time it broke, he felt too tired and just let it go. He thought that if they were meant to meet again, then they would. Constantly wearing them only for them to break like that seemed meaningless to him. Sometime after this story, Xiu officially entered university. The school he attended for 4 years was University L, and Destroyer of Souls had told stories about this school before. When Ziyu heard about those stories, he shared some of his early experiences as well. Siu listened to many friends and seniors in the school recount their tales. At the second campus, where Xiu studied, looking down from the rooftop, one would see temples surrounding the school, as if this institution were being guarded. However, in reality, this didn't hold much significance. Once, he felt an unusual chill in the practice room of the tourism department, located on the rooftop near the canteen of Campus 2. For some reason, it felt strangely cold, a sensation that not only he experienced, but many other friends felt it too. He himself is a person with a special affinity, as his maternal and paternal lineage both have sensitive individuals, as he has mentioned from the beginning. The second time he encountered a similar situation was when he was using the restroom on the 4th floor. He went in with a friend, who entered first and then stepped outside while he waited to go in afterward. It was like they were keeping an eye on each other. However, when it was his turn to sit in the restroom stall, an overwhelming chill enveloped him. It felt as if the air conditioning was running at full blast. The space inside was dim, dark, and stifling, making him feel very uncomfortable. He called out to remind his friend to stand right outside and wait for him. But while he was preoccupied with his business, he heard footsteps. The sound was very clear, as if someone from outside was approaching inside. At that moment, he suddenly felt a bit chilly, and the surroundings grew increasingly cold. Therefore, he hurriedly finished his steam bath and ran outside. He asked his friend, "Hey, did you go back inside just now?" The friend replied, "I didn't. I'm not crazy like you. I've been out here waiting for you after finishing my steam bath. Why would I go back in?" Hearing that, he finally understood, but decided not to say anything more. Then, on another occasion, there was a class he was taking, which he forgot the name of. He remembered that he could only leave around 6 p.m. The classroom was located at Campus 2 of the university, probably on the 5th or 6th floor. He couldn't recall clearly after so long. At University LA, Campus 2, there was a strange rule that he didn't quite understand. If anyone studied there, please explain it to me. According to this rule, the elevator could only be called to go up. For example, if someone pressed the button for the 4th floor, the next number they could press had to be 6. They couldn't press 5. If you wanted to go down from the 4th floor to the 2 end, you were welcome to walk or use the stairs, but you couldn't call the elevator from the 4th to the 3RD floor. He guessed that the elevator here could only be called to go up, not down. During office hours, using the elevator to go down is not allowed. However, in the evening, it is still permitted to use the elevator. One time, after we finished our class, his classmates and he were going down with the teacher from the 5th or 6th floor. The elevator was running normally, but when it reached the 4th floor, suddenly the doors opened on their own, even though no one had pressed the button or selected the floor to stop at. When the elevator doors opened, there was no one in the hallway on the 4th floor. However, the doors remained open, as if waiting for someone outside to step in. But to the naked eye, there was no one to be seen there. After a long while, the doors finally closed again. The air was really cold at that time, my friends. When the elevator doors closed and began to move, everyone thought they would be able to escape. But when it reached the 2nd floor, the elevator opened automatically. The light in the hallway on the 2nd floor was pitch dark, completely devoid of any light, not even a hint of AI. At that moment, the elevator doors closed again and continued moving. Suddenly, the lights in the elevator started flickering continuously for a while before going out completely. It goes without saying that everyone was very scared. People wanted to scream but didn't dare to. About 50 seconds later, the lights came back on and the elevator resumed its normal operation. After that incident, a few days after going home, he wandered on the internet and read some stories about strange occurrences that had happened in Facility 2 in private chat groups. He remembered that there was a case where someone had committed suicide in a classroom on the 2nd floor. His school was built in an 8-shaped design, with an elevator and restrooms. All the strange events he experienced made him think of the story he had heard before. There was one last story he heard from a friend studying in Facility 1, majoring in English language. That friend said that the school often organized ceremonies, like Halloween. But every time such an event was held, there had to be a ritual. If not performed, something would happen. Do you find that familiar? This incident sounded similar to a story about a university in District 3 that Destroy of Souls had once told. That time, when everyone organized Halloween and dressed up. You know how it is, ghosts and people mingling together, to the point that no one could tell what was real and what was fake. At the end of the Halloween event, everyone took a picture to commemorate the occasion. When they got home and opened the image file to look back, they were utterly horrified. The photos clearly showed black handprints imprinted on the walls. Hand and footprints were everywhere. The faces of those who took the photos during Halloween were also blurred. Some were clear, some were hazy, dark areas mixed with white, creating a chaotic blend. The overall feel of the image was truly eerie. Therefore, after finishing his painting, he immediately panicked and quickly deleted all the picture files from that day. The next day, he returned to school to organize a proper ceremony, as this was an annual event for the department. If any mistake were to happen this year, there would certainly be trouble in the following years, regardless of whether a ceremony was held or not. Thus, this year a ceremony had to be conducted as a way of expressing his contrition. Also, during his freshman year in college, Exius's life began to be disrupted by a series of unfortunate events happening in rapid succession. The change in environment along with the continuous occurrences made Exius' mental state unstable. He only wanted to do everything alone, eating alone, watching movies alone, going to coffee alone. At that time, Gia rented a room in GVP, commuting from NG9 to GVP for his studies. There were afternoons when Exiu would ride his bike around the districts, just to ease his mood because he felt unsettled. That day, he drove from GVP to the TM tunnel to hang out, then headed back home. He called his parents. Being a son studying away from home, he often talked about this and that with them. He told his mom, "Mom, back in the day, you only sold food in the morning, but now you're selling in the afternoon and evening too. Can you keep up your health?" At that time, his mom's health wasn't great, even though the doctor diagnosed that she was fine and just needed to take her medicine to get better. But he suddenly became very worried. He told her over the phone, "Mom, don't sell anymore. I'm serious. I'm not joking." As he said this, he cried because he was so emotional. His feelings were so intense at that moment. He was scared for his mom's health, and at that time, his mental state wasn't very stable, so it was easy for him to get emotional. His family reassured him, saying it was okay. The doctor said so, and he wasn't in any serious condition. But he was so anxious that he got on his bike and drove from GVP to Engnai, despite his parents repeatedly trying to dissuade him. And on the road, around 7-something, near the CTLI ferry, right by the MBUI shrine, he suddenly saw a little girl. From her appearance, she looked to be around elementary school age, standing in front of the entrance to the shrine. The girl was wearing a white dress, had long hair, and her face was pale. At that time, it was just past 7, and there were many adults passing by. He thought to himself, if she were a normal child, standing there at that hour, surely the adults would scold her, or at least ask who she belonged to for standing there. But it was strange. The girl stood completely still, not moving at all. Her face was slightly bowed down, as if she were looking down. He was riding slowly, so he looked very closely. When he passed by, he still watched her in the rearview mirror. He could still see the girl standing motionless in the same position. Yet, no one passing by seemed to notice her at all. At that moment, he was sure he had encountered something supernatural. Because if she were an ordinary person, especially a child, no one would act in such a strange manner like that. And this road has many small paths, making it easy to have accidents. Therefore, even though he had passed through there many times already, he still felt very scared. When he finally got home safely, He sat down and calmed himself, reflecting on the experience. At that moment, his mind seemed to be enlightened, and he clearly realized that his body was tired and his mood was not good. When one's mood declines, the spirit also falls, meaning that one becomes more susceptible to unfortunate events. Moreover, he was someone who had intuition, so he knew that he had encountered a spirit on that accident-prone stretch of road. If something unfortunate were to happen, he wouldn't be in his usual healthy state. Through this story, he wants to convey to everyone that one should absolutely avoid going out late at night, especially in deserted places when their mood is not good. If faced with an unexpected situation, one should seek out teachings or meditation to clear the mind. Since the encounter with that girl, unless it was an extreme situation, he would only go outside then. Otherwise, he would avoid all deserted areas, like the road from GVP to NGI, where his home is. Sure, as Destroy of Souls shared, during the first 3 years of university, Xu rented a place in GVP, specifically on the NJHT Street, in a small alley. I would like to keep the exact address confidential. He lived with his friend, and basically, they didn't experience any paranormal events or see any ghosts at all. Until the 3rd year, in the month of July according to the lunar calendar, he and his friend went through a strange experience one night. That evening, both of them were sleeping normally. Suddenly, after midnight, his friend jolted awake, turned to shake Siyu, and cried very hard. Siyu tried to comfort him and asked what was happening. His friend recounted, "Just now, I was sleeping soundly. Then suddenly I woke up. I turned to look at you, but I couldn't see you anywhere at all. Right where he was lying, there was a person with very long hair facing towards him. He could clearly see the face of that person, but strangely enough, the face had no features. He was extremely scared, as the incident occurred right in front of him at a very close distance. In a small, rented room, as you all know. It's not spacious at all. So he felt very frightened and screamed loudly to wake up his roommate. Siu himself had experienced spiritual encounters from a young age and had encountered many occurrences, so he was pretty sure that his friend might be facing something real. But he didn't want to delve deeper into the story, constantly reassuring his friend that it's nothing. In general, he tried to help his friend calm down so that both of them could lie down and sleep again. One special point is that, although Xiu didn't see anything in that room, he always felt a chill down his spine. During that time, when his roommate had to go back to his hometown, Xiu was left alone in the room and he was pinned down while sleeping. And this incident occurred right in the month of July of the lunar calendar, my friends. He was pinned down, his eyes wide open, looking around but seeing no one, yet unable to move. Tears welled up, and he cried as if all the pent-up frustration within him had surged forth. As Destroy of Souls had recounted, he had gone through many changes in his mental and physiological state, and the sad stories kept coming back, time and again, making him feel continually suppressed. His mind and body were always immersed in a sense of negativity, utterly exhausted. Every night, it was the same. Around 11:12 p.m., he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, as if someone was possessing him, even though he saw no one, no shadow of anything. But the situation kept worsening. In the end, he decided to move out of this room. Indeed, when he transferred to another room on DNQ NJHM Street, everything returned to normal. Life, his spirit, everything became much more comfortable. He didn't understand why, but whenever something happened, he felt as if he was being guided, as if he were being protected. The first time he recounts it, he was still in his rented room on Thong Nhat Street. He was preparing for a field trip to Duck Agricultural Market. That night, he was in his rented room and said to his friend, "Hey, I'm going to leave early tomorrow to do the presentation at the wholesale market." Suddenly, he distinctly heard the voice of a young man whispering in his ear, "Don't go, don't go. You'll get into an accident tomorrow. Don't go, don't go." He turned to look around, but saw no one. There was no man there, yet he had clearly heard those words, certainly not mistaken. He thought a lot about it, but since it was a group assignment and he had to present, he couldn't just not go. The plan was already set. To be sure, he asked his friend, "Hey, did you hear anyone say anything now?" His friend replied, "I didn't hear anything." "What's up with you? Why are you asking that?" He didn't answer, just went to lie down to get some sleep in preparation for the next morning, even though he felt a lot of unease. When the sun rose, Ixu arranged to meet his friends at the intersection of Pham Van Dong and Phan Van Tri streets. He rode his motorcycle from home to the meeting point. As he approached Vincom Phan Van Tri, unexpectedly, a lady from the office rode her bike up from below, probably from the Nguyen the Sun area nearby. Those who are in Govap might know that at the end of Nguyen Thy Sun, there is a slope leading down to Duong Bang Ham. She rode up the slope without paying attention and crashed straight into him with a loud bang. The collision jolted him to his core on that early morning, and he thought he would be seriously injured. However, luckily, after looking up and down, he found that he only had a minor cut on his leg and nothing else. He pushed his bike up and continued to the meeting spot. When he arrived, he said, "Yeah, I just had an accident." Everyone was startled and asked, "Are you okay?" But he reassured them that he was fine, normal, nothing to worry about. Although his bike was relatively damaged, his body had almost no significant issues. Until he returned to his rental room that day, he told this story to his roommate. At that time, the two of them decided that this room was indeed unlucky, with too many unfortunate events happening. Therefore, they decided to leave. The second time, he called a friend of his from Dong Nai to come visit. He said, "I'm so bored. Do you want to come hang out with me? If you're not busy or in class, come on up. I've taken a few days off." He was quite surprised when his friend immediately agreed, as it had been a long time since they last met. Usually, his friend was very busy, but this time he agreed. He arranged to meet his friend at a tea shop near the HN Xan intersection. From his house, at that time, he had moved to a new rental room. He ran out to the HN Xan intersection. He was supposed to go through Phan Vien Tier, but for some reason, he went through Trang Long instead. When he reached the intersection between Phan NLU and Inti En Ho Eng, now LVN Dui T, near the memorial of the late Mr. Chai Yu, he was hit by a couple on a motorbike who seemed to be in a hurry and rushed, crashing straight into his vehicle. Yu narrated, "He felt like he finally flew up into the sky and then fell off the bike. Imagine how intense the impact must have been for me to fly up like that. To the point where the other two were extremely panicked, thinking that this girl must be dead and he was surely going to meet his end as well. So, the two of them immediately ran over to see if he was okay. Surprisingly and unusually, he stood up normally, even managing to lift the bike myself. His arms and legs were only slightly scraped, with very ordinary wounds. He was wearing shorts, and even after falling like that, his legs didn't have a single scar. Meanwhile, his bike was completely damaged, with the fender broken and 5 screws popping out. He checked everything and found that he was fine. The bike probably had only minor issues and could be repaired. Therefore, he told the other two. "You two go ahead. I'm fine." After that, he went to Jan to hang out with friends. Later in the evening, he called his girlfriend to come over. Around 9 p.m. they headed home. On the way back, he took Ngai Nkiem Street, intending to stop by a cafe on Fan Hph Eng Street to have a private chat with his girlfriend. However, after thinking it over, he felt lazy and decided to go straight home. When he was driving on Ngai Nkiem Street, everything was normal. But suddenly, his bike tipped over and fell flat on the road. He was bewildered and didn't understand why he was riding normally. He quickly stood up, set his bike upright, and continued on his way home. His house was located in a mini apartment building on DNQ NHM Street. The parking lot was not in the basement, but on a mid-level, so he had to ride up a slope to get to the parking area. Normally, he had ridden up this slope many times before. It wasn't his first time. However, while he was halfway up the slope, his bike suddenly tipped over, causing him to fall down the slope. At that moment, he felt completely confused, not understanding why all of this was happening. And by this point, his hands and feet were completely covered in blood. He was very curious about why the car ended up like that. The floor and the road leading up the hill were completely dry, with no signs of being slippery or wet at all. Yet, he still fell 3 times in one evening. So when he got to his room, took a shower, and treated his wounds, he sat there recalling the feeling he had when he first woke up that morning. His body felt tired and lethargic, and everything around him just seemed dull. Normally, he would be in a new room, no longer the shared one, so he wouldn't feel mentally down. Every day, he would go to the gym and then go outside to engage in sports and exercise in various ways. But that morning, it was clear that someone, or perhaps his ancestors, were warning him not to go outside anymore. It created a feeling of ennui in him. He didn't want to go anywhere. But in the end, for some unknown reason, he called up a friend of his. And that friend agreed, which led to that whole situation. People had warned him, but he still insisted on going out regardless. And after all the chasing away, he texted his friend. That was an old friend he used to live with on the NGHT street. He said, "What a hassle, man. How about we go to the temple now? Any pagoda or shrine will do." So the two of them agreed and decided to head to the place of Mr. and Mrs. Tri Yu near Lan. But I didn't pay much attention to it. I don't really know if it's a pavilion or a shrine. I heard it's a very sacred place. They went to the pagoda first, then headed to the Ong Bei Shu mausoleum. After parking the bike, Isu suddenly felt an eye on him. A cold breeze swept through, sending chills down his spine and making his skin crawl. He looked around but saw no one, so he decided to step into the area of the Ong Bachu mausoleum. After he and his friend offered their prayers and drew a fortune stick, for the first time in his life, he saw a line of text appear in his fortune. The content was roughly that whatever he did, he would be protected by noble benefactors. At that moment, he read it, but wasn't sure if noble benefactors meant living people or not. However, he had the feeling that perhaps it was spirits who would follow him to provide support more than the living. From that point on, about a year later, his wife took him to the house of a university lecturer. This woman had the ability to read physiognomy, numerology, astrology, and even fortune-telling. The first time he met her, he felt a strange familiarity, as if he had known her for a long time. He didn't say anything, just sat quietly. She was cheerful and at ease, chatting with them and doing horoscope readings for everyone. She read the horoscopes based on each person's date, time, month, and year of birth. Everything unfolded smoothly and pleasantly. Just as they were about to leave, she suddenly told him, "You have someone following you. It's your ancestor from your family." She mentioned that from the moment she met him, she also felt a sense of familiarity, just like his feeling towards her. At that moment, he pleaded with her, asking if she could tell him whether the ancestor she spoke of was from his maternal or paternal side. However, she didn't specify exactly, only describing the person's appearance traits. She also shared that the day before, his ancestor had come to find her and instructed, "Tomorrow, a descendant of mine will come here for a reading," and he recounted each person in his family to her, and she exclaimed that the more he spoke, the more those individuals appeared behind him. Now, his entire lineage was standing behind him, so he shouldn't say anything more and should just go home. She could only say this much. The others wouldn't allow her to continue, and she was very tired. Indeed, friends, when he finished watching, before he asked that question, and before he described the people who had passed in his family, her expression was still quite normal. But as he finished his story, her face became increasingly pale, as if she was exhausted and had all her energy drained away. So, he respectfully said goodbye to her and left. After that event, once he finished the fortune-telling session with the lecturer, since he also have a gift, exactly 1 year later, he officially became a practitioner. Practitioner here is in quotes, in the sense that he have the ability to read tarot cards, but not with the traditional Western cards. His great-grandfather used to be a teacher, and his maternal family used to have a connection to spirituality in the past. At this point, he has the ability to read tarot for others, but he reads according to his feelings, not following traditional interpretations. He wants to explain a little more about this. Those who read tarot might know, as Destroy of Souls mentioned, that if there are any mistakes, he hopes everyone will forgive him. According to the information that Exiu recounted, each tarot card has different messages. To interpret a card, one must consider the other cards, depend on the question, and also take into account the layers of meaning. However, he does not read in the traditional way. When he draws a card and looks at it, he instinctively senses as if the card is telling him what is happening and what that person needs. In general, his way of reading tarot is somewhat different. To delve deeper into the matters related to his muscle tension, one must recount the times he narrowly escaped death or had premonitions, even though he did not fully understand the spiritual realm at that time. First, from his childhood to his adolescence, around the time he was in the 4th grade, during the Mid-Autumn Festival, on the 15th day of the 8th lunar month, about 10:20 or 23 days before the festival, he had a strange dream. In that dream, he saw his own house, the very house he was living in reality, hosting a funeral, and the deceased was his great-grandmother on his mother's side. He witnessed the funeral proceedings, from the chanting rituals to all the intricate details, as if he were experiencing it firsthand from beginning to end. What was peculiar was that, at that time, his family had never experienced a funeral, and he had never participated in one due to his young age. Yet, he was able to dream of such a complete process. It seemed utterly illogical and mysterious. The next morning, when he woke up, he still remembered that dream, but did not think much of it. He thought it was just an ordinary dream and did not tell anyone in the house. However, that dream did not occur just once. It repeated itself exactly for 3 consecutive days, regular as squeezing a lemon. On the evening of the 15th, he went out with his second sister to hang out with her friends. Because he was with older siblings, they did not come back until about 9 or 10 p.m., partly because he was tired, and partly because he thought the ominous signs had ended, he did not pay much attention anymore. Early on the 16th, around 5 a.m., the home phone rang. He woke up immediately and ran outside to see his father on the phone. Just as his father hung up, he didn't wait for him to say anything but asked right away, "Dad, great-grandma has passed away, hasn't she?" His father was extremely surprised, not understanding how he knew the information he had just received less than a minute prior. At that moment, the whole family was busy preparing to go down to the grandparents' place to take care of the funeral arrangements. And the strange thing was that every detail during the 3 days of the funeral occurred exactly as he had dreamt. From the guests to every individual at the funeral, everything unfolded just as he had seen in his dream. And that was what happened in 4th grade. By 5th grade, his family experienced another loss. This time, it was his great-grandmother on his father's side who passed away. The night before his great-grandmother died, he had gone to the bathroom. In the past, the bathroom was separate and located outside, rather than built inside the house as it is now. He was very scared of ghosts, so he often called his father or older sister to take him. When his father took him to the bathroom, he clearly heard someone calling his name. He didn't respond because the voice belonged to an elderly woman. He immediately associated it with his great-grandmother, as if there was something that compelled him to think that way. As it turned out, the next morning when he opened his eyes, his mother said, "Your great-grandmother has passed away." At the time of his paternal great-grandmother's passing, he mentioned that he had 2 great-grandmothers. He asked his mother which great-grandmother had died, and she said it was the elder one. The elder great-grandmother passed away at the age of 101, very old indeed. Yet when she was in her 90s, she was still very strong, without any difficulties in walking. In fact, she could pull out grass very easily. As you know, the roots of grass often grow quite deep, but she could uproot them with her bare hands, incredibly strong. His younger great-grandmother was also very healthy. There is another incident related to the elder great-grandmother. She had a son, but he died in the war. Even though the family has made efforts for many years, they still have not been able to find his body. He died in the area of the St. Forest. In the end, the family decided to dig a grave and set up a spirit tablet for the purpose of offering incense to him. People often refer to this as a wind grave. During the funeral of the elder great-grandmother, his family saw a very large butterfly flying over and landing on the coffin. They wondered if that was either she or her son coming to take their mother away. Someone in the family tried to play the lottery, but he doesn't remember what numbers they picked. In the end, they won. On the day of the burial of the elder great-grandmother, the family received news from the grave of her son, the soldier who had died. There was a roof over his grave, but for some unknown reason, during the burial of the elder great-grandmother, the roof suddenly collapsed, making a loud crash that startled everyone. And that was the end of the 2 times he had prophetic dreams. By the 3rd time, it was the moment he nearly died, as Destroy of Souls often recounted. Those who come close to death usually have a very strong spiritual connection. That year, he was in the 10th grade. On the 6th day of Tet, his friends and their families invited him to go play at Ho Tram. According to Exiu, at that time, Ho Tram hadn't been developed with many resorts like it is now. It was still quite wild and deserted. He still clearly remembers where he swam back then. There was a sand dune, and climbing up the dune would lead to another bunker. I has never been to Ho Tram, so I cannot imagine what the sand dune cave looks like. However, the road to Ho Tram, especially the forest road at night, is extremely deserted. His family has heard many reports of drowning incidents in that area, right where he was swimming. Unfortunately, this time, he almost became the next headline. He recounted that from morning to noon, he swam without any issues, but around 3 p.m. when he and a cousin went for a swim, the unexpected happened. There were these squares that looked like the ones people often use to raise shrimp and crabs in the Mekong Delta, built from concrete foundations placed beneath the water. Although there weren't many, they only dared to swim close to the shore because the water was already very deep. As they stepped a little further, they noticed a high sandbank rising up. Right behind this sandbank was a very deep area of water, and they didn't dare to approach that high sandbank to play, even though it would have been more fun up there. But as the two of them were preparing to go in, a big wave crashed down. You all know that when a wave hits, it pulls those inside out to sea. They were pushed out to the deep water. Neither of us knew how to swim, so they could only flail around, thinking they would drown. Fortunately, at that moment, they saw a ledge from a nearby square. They desperately tried to cling to the ledge, our hands grabbing in panic. But his friend's grip was stronger, so he managed to hold on while he slipped out. While he was thrashing about, he remembered being able to see everything clearly underwater, without any stinging or pain in his eyes. At that moment, his little brother reached out his hand to save him. Luckily, the two of them managed to grab onto each other, and he tried to pull him in. He also used every ounce of strength he had to hold onto the ledge, and finally, he sat safely on the shore. And when he looked up, friends, there was a terrifying scene that he could never forget. Just about 1 or 2 meters from where they stood, Ziyu saw a woman. Her face was pale, and she was looking at him with a toothy grin. Only Ziyu saw this sight, while the cousin sitting next to him saw nothing at all. This woman stood right there, as Nguyen had just mentioned, in the floodplain area where the land was higher on one side and the water had receded very low on the other. But this woman stood there with half of her body submerged in the water, while the upper half floated above, as if she were standing in the middle of the stream rather than being tall enough for her feet to touch the bottom. And even if she were that tall, why, upon seeing a dead person nearby, just about 1 meter away, equivalent to an adult's arm's length, did she not come to help, but merely stood there with a grin on her face? Needless to say, both of them were very scared. When they finally reached the shore, even though Exiu had seen the horrifying sight of the spirit, surely a water ghost that had drowned, he was terrified and quickly turned to run away. He told his parents about it, and from then on, they also knew the story. Fortunately, the heavens were kind, allowing their child to survive. His parents strictly prohibited him from going to any places with rivers, streams, ponds, or lakes during that time. He himself felt a bit scared, as if there was some kind of omen. Then one time, when he was in 11th grade, he went to have his fortune told with his mother. At that time, he wasn't completely convinced about spiritual matters or fortune-telling. But the fortune teller said something that changed his mind. This child's fate was supposed to end prematurely since the 6th year of last year, rather than still being alive until now. Luckily, he has the good fortune created by his grandparents and parents, which is why he escaped the clutches of death. Surviving that ordeal means he will have a long life ahead. Remember, make sure to do good deeds. Upon hearing those words, he truly began to believe in the experiences he had gone through. Hearing this, both mother and daughter felt a chill down their spine. Siu shared with Nguyen that recently, his spiritual connection with his family had become very strong. It was as if his mother in Dong Nai, who sold food, was right there with him. In her work, using knives and tools, getting cut or twisting an ankle was a possibility. Every time his mother had such incidents, he felt as if his body was on fire, his heart and guts clenched tightly. And when he called to check, it turned out to be true. Then there was a time when his grandfather fell seriously ill. The family hid it from him because they knew how much he cared for his grandfather. He grew up under the protection of his maternal family in a rubber plantation area along the way to VNTU. Everyone was afraid that if he found out, he would become worried. That afternoon, he sat with his wife and said, "Hey, why do I suddenly feel so uneasy inside?" He took out the tarot deck to do a reading and received a message from the cards indicating that his grandfather was ill. He confirmed that it was true. When he did the reading, it was around 4-something in the afternoon, and by 5 o'clock he called his father and said, "Grandpa is sick, right, Dad?" His father nodded in agreement, confirming that indeed his grandfather was ill. Earlier this year, he had also done a general tarot reading for his family. When he drew a card for his grandmother, he felt goosebumps before even flipping it over, as if he had an ominous premonition about that card. However, since it was a family matter, he continued with the reading. If someone asked him to do a tarot reading, or if there were guests who wanted a reading, and he felt a similar bad vibe, he would definitely keep it to himself. But this time, when he flipped the card over, he was horrified to realize that his grandmother would pass away. Receiving such grim news from the tarot deck made him extremely worried, leaving him feeling very uncomfortable. He decided to set the deck aside and stop reading. He put it away in a corner and did not touch it or do any further readings. But then, what was meant to happen eventually came to pass. The fortune teller predicted that approximately around the middle of the year, the family would experience the passing of their grandmother. He didn't know the exact day, but as the time approached, for example, around May or June, his mother had a trip to the Mekong Delta. During the trip, he heard people mention a woman in Long Suyen who was very skilled at fortune telling. Indeed, when they arrived at her house, she said, "Normally, I wouldn't disclose this, but I'll make an exception so your family can be informed. One of your mothers will pass away. I can only say this much. If we consider the lunar calendar, it will likely happen around the middle of the year, in May or June. However, if we use the solar calendar, it could be around March or April. You should prepare yourself. The family will have a mourning period." She spoke precisely like that, and this completely aligned with the time frame that Ancient Exu had previously deduced using tarot cards at home. As May and June approached, Exius's body grew restless, uneasy, as if preparing to receive some sad news. Until just before the day his grandmother passed away, he distinctly remembered that around 2 p.m. while he was lying down, he suddenly heard a sound. The call was vague and unclear. The next day, precisely at that hour, he heard the same calling again, but this time he clearly recognized his grandmother's voice. He jolted awake, recalling the old dream when his great-grandmother and great-grandfather passed away. He had always received a warning. Oh my, his heart felt like it was on fire. And exactly 1 hour later, his father called up and said, "Grandma has passed away, my dear." Everything doesn't stop there, my friends. It's as if serious events hit his family all at once. At 3 p.m., his grandmother passed away, while that very morning, his grandfather was admitted to the hospital in Dong Nai. However, later on, his condition worsened, so he had to be transferred to Hospital 115 in Saigon. At the same time, 2 major events occurred. One was the funeral of his grandmother, and the other was the emergency situation of his grandfather, with no clear indication of how things would unfold. Everything was in chaos. However, the funeral still had to be organized. The family assigned people to manage the funeral arrangements and also sent individuals to the hospital to monitor the situation of the grandfather. At that time, Xiu shared that his grandfather was suffering from a brain-related illness, so the family decided to hide the news of the grandmother's passing from him, fearing it would affect his health. The deceased has passed, but those who are alive must continue to live. Everyone has reached a consensus on this matter. Although they are husband and wife, if they don't communicate with each other, later on, when he finds out, it may shock him greatly. However, at that time, there was no better option. According to Xiu, at the funeral of his grandmother, she came back and merged with the two people. She conveyed messages, spoke here and there. In general, a representative story that An Gai-en recounted is about the incident of two bricklayers who died in front of his house. Later, they returned to meet Xiu as if they were pinning him down. His grandmother was a devout Buddhist. She had procured prayer beads and chanted the Ksitagarbha Sutra, then gave them to her grandson. She was also very close to a nun at the temple. Before she passed away, she suffered from an illness for 10 days. During that time, she began to refuse food and drink, not listening to anyone, resembling someone who is about to leave, no longer wanting to consume anything. The story goes like this. When the nun learned about the situation, she promised that if the old lady passed away, she would come to chant sutras and recite the Buddha's name to help her easily attain rebirth in a good realm. However, when the old lady did pass away, it coincided with the Buddha's birthday festival, so the nun was very busy with many duties at the temple, as many devotees had come during that time. The nun could not leave. Because of this, the old lady came back to remind her, crying and saying that she was very sad, wondering why the nun had made such a promise but did not attend her funeral. The family was worried and hurried to the temple to meet the nun, telling her that they were hoping for her to come to the funeral. At that moment, the nun replied that the funeral would take place over 3 days, and today she was busy and could not go right away, but she promised to come the next day. The next day, the nun came to the funeral. After chanting sutras, the nun said that the old lady had returned to inform her descendants. The old lady's family said that she was now happy that she had departed and could hear the sound of the chanting, so she was at peace to go. The nun also added that looking at the old lady's complexion, it was rosy, her body still had warmth, not cold, which was a sign that she would attain rebirth in a good realm. The nun congratulated the family for the merits of the old lady and told them they could be at ease as she had passed away peacefully. However, there is a very heartbreaking story that has happened to his family. 8 days after his grandmother passed away, his grandfather also died in the hospital. The pain of losing 2 beloved family members is almost doubled. When bringing him home, everyone tried to suppress their grief to complete all the procedures for bidding farewell to the deceased and laying him to rest. But there was an incident that occurred, and through this video, I also want to warn everyone. People often say, the more teachers, the more ghosts. There are spiritual matters that science cannot prove, and we cannot deny their existence. However, not everyone who claims to be a teacher is truly a teacher. Do you remember the details that Destroy of Souls shared about the great-grandfather on Ancient Xiu's paternal side? In the past, he was a well-known master in the entire region. He had 2 disciples who inherited his teachings, and to this day, both of them are still alive, continuing his profession, specializing in selecting auspicious days, times, and spiritual matters. Before the two of them passed away, the family was worried about a potential overlap of funerals, so they convened and decided to consult a master to check if there would be an overlap in the funerals. If there was, they would find a way to resolve it. At that time, everyone mentioned a figure known as Mr. High, one of the two disciples who inherited the teachings of NHXU's great-grandfather. Since he was a family member and also a disciple, everyone thought they would ask Mr. High to help. However, NHXU then suggested that everyone go on their own. After they returned, they brought back an amulet and instructed that all the children and grandchildren in the extended family should wear that amulet. NHXU did not remember exactly what the instructions were, but generally, anyone listed should wear it. And Xiao also wore the amulet, but during the time he wore it, he felt extremely heavy, exhausted, and unable to explain it. Everything in his body felt like it had been drained of energy. He felt like a soulless corpse, very fatigued. And it wasn't just NHXU. All the people who wore that amulet felt similarly. At that moment, the family began to grow suspicious, specifically when Exia's father started to inquire further. Subsequently, they discovered a strange story. Specifically, when the family went to consult about the burial, Exia's father did not go himself but sent someone else in his place. This person did not seek out Mr. Tu, but instead approached some strange sorcerer on the street. After receiving the news, everyone was very anxious. Exia's father went to see Mr. Tu in person to double-check everything carefully. Mr. Tu said, "Oh my God, there is no such thing as a burial coincidence. The ancestors died due to certain circumstances, or something like that, generally using a lot of technical terms. But Exiu did not remember everything clearly. Basically, there was no such thing as dying from a burial coincidence or anything. Furthermore, the talisman that the sorcerer gave to Exiu's family contained spirit soldiers. When worn, it is no surprise that people would feel fatigued." After listening, everyone in the house was completely taken aback. Xia's father asked, "Now, what do we do?" Then Mr. Hai said, "This talisman here, just burn it outside. While burning, chant, 'Wherever you came from, please go back there for us, and it'll be done.' As for worshipping the ancestors, just continue as usual. There's absolutely nothing to worry about." Just as Mr. Hai said, after burning the talisman, Xiu felt very relaxed. All his fatigue vanished into thin air. However, there was one thing. While burning, Xiu had shown the talisman to me. The talisman was very small, about the size of a cake or a small piece of paper, yet it took half an hour to burn completely. Even though it was just a piece of paper and not metal or anything heavy, it took half an hour to burn away. After this incident, his family was truly terrified, not knowing who had concocted this scheme. There was someone in the house who was a teacher, yet instead of asking for help, they sought a master from somewhere to obtain a talisman. This talisman was not only wrong, but also inaccurate. His grandmother, after her passing, cared deeply for him and always followed him, providing protection and blessings in many ways. By the time he sent this story to Destroy of Souls, several events had occurred as follows. First, everything unfolded during his grandmother's funeral. When he heard the news of her passing, he immediately rushed back to Engnai to prepare for the mourning rituals. However, on the first morning of the funeral, his wife and he had to return to Saigon to manage some work at our store. That day, he sat right beside his grandmother's coffin and prayed, "Grandma, I'm going back to the city with my wife to deliver goods to customers. We will finish our work and come back to you as soon as possible. Please take care of me and help me sell more at the shop." After speaking, the couple returned to the city. The messages from customers kept flooding in, orders coming in one after another, non-stop. By the end of the day, the two of them had finished dealing with all the work and outstanding orders. Once everything was completed, the couple ventured out into the heavy rain to visit Grandma. Outside, the rain was so heavy it felt like a storm, but they decided to go back, determined not to be late for their appointment again. On another occasion, while XU was riding his motorbike on Dien Phu Street, it was a stormy day with strong winds and heavy rain. He was riding normally when suddenly there was a loud bang. Looking down at the front of his bike, he saw a large branch that had just fallen right in front of him, barely missing the front of the bike. If he had gone a fraction of a second faster, he would have definitely been hit by that branch falling from above. As you can imagine, with such weight and force, if it had landed on his head from that height, the consequences would have been severe. There's no need to say anything more. He's got goosebumps all over, and immediately he feels that his grandmother has just saved his life once again. At this point, we temporarily conclude the stories that XU has sent to Destroy of Soul, as well as wrap up today's video. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to XU for sharing, allowing me the opportunity to recount these stories to the audience. If everyone loves Destroy of Souls and enjoys this video, please don't hesitate to hit the like and share buttons. Most importantly, click on the subscribe button, press the bell icon next to it, and leave your comments in the section below to increase interaction with the channel. When I release new videos, everyone will be prioritized to receive notifications thanks to YouTube's algorithm. I thank all of you for listening up to this point. I also look forward to receiving your spiritual stories through messages on the fan page, personal Facebook, or via email. You can send your emails to me at the address displayed on the screen, enjofuang@fenhuangmedia.com. Thank you all once again. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.